Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Kuf Tet Zayin. This is the daf for Chol HaMoed Sukkot, for Shabbat Chol HaMoed. We're going to get started from the what Rav Huna said on the previous daf, which is anyone who says that when there's a situation when a person dies and they have no sons, they only have daughters, but they had a son and their son had daughters, and the daughter is supposed to inherit from the son, the granddaughter gets everything, and the sisters get nothing. And anyone who says that the sisters share it 50-50 with the granddaughter is mistaken. And why are they mistaken? Because that's a Stuki opinion. We don't believe in that. And then we started to see the argument with the Stuki and Rabbi Yochanan and Zakai. The argument that Stuki was, well, the daughter is obviously closer to the deceased than the granddaughter, so shouldn't she at least get 50%? To which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai tried to prove from this story of Anna, which was a little bit of a strange proof, as we talked about with some of the difficulties with the explaining that, but basically saying how Anna took the place of the son as a grandson, and therefore the grandson is equal to the son, which means if the granddaughter inherits on behalf of the son, it's basically she gets all the inheritance, the sisters will get nothing, and that's his proof, to which the Tzduki said, what kind of a proof is that? Which we explained in a few different ways. Now we're going to get moving to Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's retort. Last three words on Kuftef Bava Bet. Amar lo shoteh, you fool. Velote Torah shlema shalanu k'sicha b'telah shalachem. How could you compare our complete Torah to your silly conversation? Your arguments are pathetic. I have a real good proof. And in fact, Rashbam says, do you think that proof that you knocked out before was really my proof? No, I was just pulling a few straws out. But I have a real proof, and here it is. Ma lebat beno sheken yipak kocha b'mkom achim. Now, the granddaughter, does she inherit if the deceased leaves two sons, let's say, and the third son was dead, and here's the daughter of the third son, does she get a portion together with her brothers? Yeah, of course, right? Because her portion, she gets a third, because her father should have gotten a third, so she gets a third of her father's portion. So just like bat beno yipak kocha b'mkom achim, meaning when there's brothers, the granddaughter still gets. When the deceased has brothers, when the deceased has other sons and her father's brothers are still alive, she still gets her father's portion. But a daughter is obviously much less strong than a granddaughter, because the granddaughter's strength comes from her father. And since her father would inherit when there's brothers, she's in a much stronger position than a sister. A sister only gets, right, meaning a daughter, let's say there's a bunch of brothers and there's one daughter or three daughters, doesn't matter how many, as long as there's brothers, she has brothers, she doesn't get anything. So therefore, it must be that the granddaughter through the son obviously has more strength than the daughter herself. Vinitzchum, and with that, he wins out the argument, and they made that a celebratory day. And that's why it's listed in Megillat Ta'anit on days that we're supposed to be happy and, again, not institute fast days and other such things. Now we're ready if we're on this topic of the Bat HaBen, the granddaughter inheriting. There was a time in history when they basically froze this halacha in a particular situation, and we'll see why right now. Remember the story at the end of Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, with the Pilegesh B'Giv'ah, and how there ended up being this civil war between the Binyamites and all the other tribes, and they kill and wipe out a huge number of people in Binyamin. There's only 600 left. And it says there that all of a sudden there was a big problem, because imagine there were thousands, tens of thousands of people in Binyamin. They're all now dead. All the Nachalah Binyamin is divided among 600 people. That's it. Okay? So, all of a sudden they were worried that there wasn't going to be left any Nachalah Binyamin, and the tribe was going to be wiped out. So what exactly did they institute to protect this? So the drasha in this pasuk is, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Tebei Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Yitzchak says, from the house of Rabbi Ami, they taught, Melamed she'itnu al shevet Binyamin shelo tirash bat haben im ha'achim. They basically said the following: if a man dies, leaves over, let's say, two sons, and one son who died but left a granddaughter, then that granddaughter will not inherit. We'd rather give all the inheritance over to the brothers, and the court has the power to do this from what we call hefker beit and hefker. The court can move money and property how they decide. That's something that's in the jurisdiction of the court to be able to do, even if it goes even against Torah law. So basically, they said for this time period, so that what will happen if we give it to the granddaughters will get huge chunks of land because each of these 600 people had huge chunks of land. And then they'll go marry someone from a different tribe, and the land will be given over to someone from a different tribe. And then the tribe of Binyamin will be wiped out. So basically, they said when there's brothers and a granddaughter, we're not going to let the granddaughter inherit at all. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Now, already we're talking about a situation where a son dies and only leaves over daughters. So Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, remember these names, okay? Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was known to be Rabbi Yochanan's rabbi. Kol she'eno miniach liyorsho, akadosh baruch hu maleh alav evra. So he says, I don't know if he was his direct rabbi. The truth is I have to check that, but he definitely passes on a lot of his statements. And later the Gemara will call him his Rav. Anyone who's not mania, I really should look that up right now. Let me just see if I can quickly look that up. But anyway, kol she'eno miniach ben liyorsho, kadosh baruch hu maleh alav evra. Now they say if somebody dies without children, it's a sign that God is angry with this person. Okay, meaning this is not considered a good thing to do that. I'm sorry, I just want to quickly look. Rabbi Yochanan. No, I don't think he was doesn't look like he was a direct student of his. No, he wasn't a direct student of his. Okay, but he does pass on statements of his. Okay, fine. That's what I could see, at least quickly. Okay, let's go back. By the way, I like pointing out these things. This is Encyclopedia L'Chachmei Talmud VaGeonim. It gives you some brief history of who studied from who and some information about their lives. Okay, so now let's go back. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, if you don't leave a son to inherit you, God is angry with you. How do we know this? Because not leaving a son to inherit, and by the way, this goes with all those statements we've seen in the Gemara about the importance of having a male child. They really believe this was very important. They basically say it's God's anger on you if or God will be angry if you don't leave a son to inherit. First of all, there was also a problem that then a lot of it was financial, because if it goes to your daughters, your nachala, if you don't have sons, then it gets lost and it won't be left with your tribe anymore as soon as if she marries out of the tribe. So k'tiv hacha, how do we know that God is angry? Remember it says in the pasuk, and we saw this already, we darshaned it, they pass on the Yerusha to the daughter if there's no sons. Now in all the other places about Yerusha, it said they give it. Here it says they pass it. Now before we darshaned other things from it, now they're saying, Evra means anger, and we're going to prove that right now. It will be a day of anger. It's a pasuk from Sefania. Anyway, Evra is anger, and Havartem is the same root as Eva, even though it means to pass over, but here they take it to mean anger. It's the anger of God that you had to pass your Yerusha on to your daughter. Ashir ein chalifot lamo v'lo yaru Elohim. Now we're going to see a similar pasuk. It's a pasuk from Tehillim. It says these are people that don't have replacements because they're not Yirei Elohim. Okay, they understand v'lo yaru Elohim means because they didn't fear God, they end up without someone to take their place. Now, what does it mean to take their place? They don't have someone to take their place. Well, there's a machlok between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Levi. Chad amal kol she'eino miniach ben. One says this is talking about someone who doesn't leave a son. And here you see it. Someone who's not God-fearing will be punished. That's what we talk about. The anger of God will be punished. They won't have children, male children. Okay? They will leave only female children or no children at all. And the other one says someone who doesn't leave over a student. That's the punishment for someone who's not God-fearing. Not that they won't have sons, but they won't have students. Now the question is, who said what? So Tistayin, first the Gemara says, let's try to conclude that Rabbi Yochanan da Amar Talmid. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who said a student. Why? He didn't think that if you're not God-fearing, you won't have male children, because Rabbi Yochanan was known to walk around to Shiva houses. It's a little depressing, but I guess he was trying to strengthen the mourners by saying, I've been through this as well. And he would say, Rabbi Yochanan, din garme da asirai bil. He says, here I carry around with me every day. These are the bones of my 10th son. I buried 10 sons. I have no sons left. And now he wouldn't go around bragging and saying, I'm not Yirei Elohim and I got punished. I have no sons. Right? That'd be a weird thing to be doing. So people aren't supposed to brag about their sins, and it would be strange. So it must be Rabbi Yochanan didn't hold that way. Otherwise, he wouldn't be going around bragging that he lost 10 sons. Again, he wasn't exactly bragging, but he was definitely talking about it a lot publicly. So now they say, okay, so Tistayim to Rabbi Yochanan Amar Talmid. He must have been the one who said if you didn't leave a student, that's a non-God-fearing person gets punished, that they won't leave students. But not having sons is not a punishment from God because you weren't a God-fearing person. So if that's the case, since Rabbi Yochanan said one and Rabbi Shimon Levi said the other, we're going to then assume Rabbi Yochanan Amar Talmid, Rabbi Shimon Levi Amar Ben. It must be Rabbi Shimon Levi who said the son. But that doesn't really work because also Rabbi Yehoshua Levi, Rabbi Shimon Levi lo azil lebeitam ela lebeiman deshachi v'lobani. He wouldn't spend any time going to shiva houses unless it was a person who died without sons. Okay, if a person dies and didn't leave any sons, he would go. Why? Specifically, would he go to a shiva house like that? It's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. It says you will cry for those who go. What does it mean to go? It's those who go without male children, those who leave the world without leaving male children. So if he would go to shiva houses only of those people, it must be he respected them and not that he thought these people aren't Yerei Shamayim, otherwise he wouldn't go to a shiva for them. So now we're back to the reverse. If we know two people said one said one said the other, if Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Huda Amar Talmid, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and therefore he must have said Talmid, and if Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Huda Amar Talmid, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ben, then it must be Rabbi Yochanan said the son. In which case, we're back to square one. Kasha to Rabbi Yochanan. Then how did Rabbi Yochanan say, this is the bone of my 10th son, as if there wasn't a problem? And Rabbi Yochanan also said, it's the punishment from God. Lo kasha hadideh hadirabe. It's not difficult. One, he was quoting his own opinion. That's when he went around saying, this is the bone of my 10th son. He didn't really believe it was a punishment for not being God-fearing, probably because he knew he was a God-fearing person, and yet he lost all his sons. And this, by the way, shows, right, well, let me just finish, and then I'll go back to that. Hadirabe, the other, when he said that it's the anger of God, or that, you're not Yerei Shamayim, he's quoting his rabbi. And here's where I said before, maybe Rabbi Shimon Yochai was his rabbi. It didn't seem to make sense time-wise, right? Rabbi Shimon Yochai was older, but he was quoting what was said by his rabbis in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. And that's that they view it as punishment, but he did it. Now, interesting to see, his life experience could have influenced him in deciding that he didn't agree with his rabbis about this, because he saw himself that he left no sons, and he understood that it was, that it was his, that it wasn't his fault. It wasn't that he's Yirei Elohim. He didn't view this as punishment from God, or at least not for his behavior, right? We don't know how he viewed it. It's pretty traumatic to think he buried 10 sons in his life, but that could have affected his opinion about this topic. Siman. Now, if we're already on the topic of people who don't leave children, we're going to start with a drasha of Rabbi Pinchas ben Hama, and then we're going to move over to two other drashot of his. The siman for these three drashot are Hadad, Ani, Chacham. Really, one is directly related, the other two are less so. They're just here because other drashot he said. Darash Rabbi Pinchas ben Hama. My dichtiv v'Hadad shama b'Mitzrayim ki shachav David imapotav v'chimet Yoav sar tzava. There's something imbalanced about this pasuk. It says Hadad heard that David rested with his fathers, which means died, and that Yoav, the head of the army, died. And now, one says shachav, David, and by Yoav it says met. It's very weird, especially in the same pasuk. You would think they would choose the same word. Why is there a difference in the language used? So they answered, David shiniach ben, this is Rabbi Pinchas ben Hama's drasha. David shiniach ben, he left a son, meaning he left Shlomo to take his place. Ne'emar bo shchiva. Yoav shelo iniach ben, Yoav didn't leave a son to take his place. Ne'emar bo mita. Right? Again, showing it's bad to die without sons. Yoav must have died without male sons, and therefore it's called death, as opposed to rest, right? Like rest in peace. We say rest, right? It's a softer term. Yoav, lo iniach ben, wait a minute. Yoav didn't leave any sons? What do you mean? It says there were sons of Yoav, and there was Yoav ben Yechiel. Clearly he did leave sons, or at least one son. So now we say, Ela David shiniach ben kmoto ne'emra bo shchiva. Yoav shelo iniach ben kmoto ne'emra bo mita. So we modify the drasha. It was that David left a son to fill his shoes. That was Shlomo. He took over. But Yoav didn't have a son who became the Sar Tzavah. He didn't become the head of the army. He didn't follow in his footsteps. Therefore, it's called mita. So there's leaving over sons, and then there's leaving over sons to take your place. So we saw the importance of sons really has a lot to do with number one, and you can understand why they wanted male children, because in those days, especially, women didn't have such roles in the community. You want a man to take over your place. You want a man to keep your nachala within your tribe, right? There's reasons for this. Maybe it helps us understand better those sources that seem so, anti-women that, they didn't want female children. It's not that. It's just they wanted children to continue their legacy. And men were more geared toward that. Okay, second drasha. Darash Rabbi Pinchas ben Hama, kashe aniyut b'toch beito shel adam yoter mi-50 makot. Poverty in your house is worse than having 50, I don't know what the word makot, but, bad things happen to you. Shenema, chanuni atem re'ai ki yad Eloha naga bi. So, Eov says to his friends, you should appease me, you should be nice to me because God's hand has attacked me. Now, what does it mean God's hand has attacked me? Well, said by the makot, okay, this goes back to things we say at the Seder, that it was the finger of God. Now, the finger of God are the 10 plates. So that means each finger is 10 plates. If he says the yad, hand of God attacked me, that means 5, each one being 10, that gets you to 50. So he was slewn by God with, 50 kind of plagues, you could call them. And his friends, when they go to appease him or make him feel better, now this is a totally different chapter, it says, Hishamer al tefen al av, and don't look at all the bad things that happen to you. This is better to choose this than poverty. In other words, the 50 makot that you had are way better than poverty. So from here, you see poverty is the worst thing that could befall a person. If you have someone sick in your household, what should you do? Go to a wise man, a chacham, have them pray for you. How do we know this? Shenema, pasuk from Mishle, Hama from Proverbs, Hama melech malachei mavet. The anger of God is like the angel of death. Okay, meaning that's when someone's sick and you're worried they're going to die. The ish chacham yechapchena. Who can atone for you? Only right an ish chacham you can atone for you. So go to an ish chacham, have them pray, and that could provide you with atonement and help the sick person in your family or in your house. Okay, that's the end of all the drasha sections, which really, we'll summarize this part before we move on. We had the issue with the tzduki and winning out of the tzduki saying the bata ben inherits entirely the granddaughter when there's a daughter and the daughter doesn't get anything. Then we had how bad is it for someone who doesn't leave a son or perhaps maybe doesn't leave a student. Maybe not leaving sons is not as bad, but not leaving a student is also perhaps the other way of understanding it. Who said what? We went through, and then we had these three drashot of Rabbi Pinchas ben Hama. Now we're going to move back to the Mishnah. Anyone who comes first, their children come first, come before moving to the next level. So again, the deceased, it goes to their sons. If they don't have sons, it goes to the grandchildren. If no grandchildren, it goes to the daughters. If it doesn't, no daughters, their children. If not, to the father. And only after that does it go, right? Ha'av kodem l'chol, what did we say? L'chol yotzei hirechav. That means the father comes before the brothers of the deceased. First, it goes to the father after the daughters and the daughters' grandchildren. Then father, then to the father's children. And then from there, it goes to the father's brothers. So now they say the following. By Rami bar Hama. Rami bar Hama asked the following question. Right, and they added this line that the father comes before all of father's children, which makes sense if the order is father, then brothers, because brothers are the children of the father. So now Rami bar Hama is going to ask 2 questions. First, he asks one, and then we say, that wasn't such a good question. The answer was kind of obvious. And then we're going to say, well, he was actually really more preoccupied with the second. And to use, the Gemara is going to give us the example of our forefathers. Okay, Abram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Yaakov has a brother, Esav. And now we're going to have some questions about who inherits if some of the people are dead. So let's go through it. The first question is, by Rami bar Hama, Avi ha'av ve'achi ha'av. Okay, what if there's Esav? Now, his brother Yaakov is already dead. Okay, he doesn't have sons. Forget the sons. Okay, if no sons, we go to the father. That's Yitzchak. Yitzchak's dead. His brother Yaakov also dead. Okay, so we have our usual order is sons, father, brother, uncle. So it should go to Yishmael, right? But they say, what if Abraham is still alive? So Avia Av Achia. So the father of his father, that's the grandfather Abraham, and the brother of his father, which is Yishmael. So there, Kigon Abraham Yishmael ben Esav. So Esav, who gets Esav's property, Abraham or Yishmael? So I'm a Rava. What do you mean? It's obvious. Tashma. Ha'av kodem l'chol yotzei recho. The father always comes first. So the father could be Yitzchak, right? Yitzchak's the father of Esav, but theoretically, Avram's also the father. In other words, let's just imagine if Yitzchak doesn't inherit, right? So it goes up a generation. And therefore, Avram is always going to be before Yishmael because the father goes before all their descendants. So therefore, he's obviously going to go first. If you think about it, what's Ishmael's connection to Esav? It's only through Avraham, so that's why it makes sense. The Rami bar Hama, so why did he even ask this question? To which the Gemara says, right, turning now to Amabet, Agav Chorfe lo Ienba. Well, he was so harif, he was so sharp, he had a different question in mind, and he was really thinking about that one, wasn't really focused, so he kind of asked this one as well. But sometimes your intelligence or your thinking distracts you from things that are obvious. By Rami bar Hama. Now, here's the second question. This is a little more complicated. Avi ha'av ve'achiv. What if you have Kigon Avraham v'Yaakov b'nichsei Esav? Now, what if you go up 2 generations to Avraham? Like after you go to Yitzchak, okay? Now, what did we say? You go sons, father and all their, right? And then after father, what did we say? Av v'chol yotzei recha. So that would be Yitzchak and then Yaakov. That's what we would assume. But now they're saying, wait a minute. If Avram is considered like Yitzchak, really, because think about it. If it goes to Yitzchak and Yitzchak's not alive, theoretically, Yitzchak's inheritance should go to his father. So maybe it goes to Avram first and then to Yaakov. To which Rava says, in fact, it does. Okay? So again, Kigon Avram v'Yaakov b'nichsei Esav eze mehen kodem. So if you have the grandfather or the brother of the deceased, which one comes first? It says the father comes before anyone who comes from him. That means Avram is always going to come before any of his grandsons. Now, obviously, he's not going to come before Esav's children and grandchildren, but he will come before a brother of the deceased. Rami bar Hama, what was he thinking? Yotzei recho shelo, below yotzei recho shel beno. He says, wait, that means Avram comes before Yitzchak, if it's an issue, or Avram comes before Yishmael, like in the previous. That I get, because Yishmael isn't directly related to Esav. But he doesn't come before the what does it mean, Yotzei Recho? It means those who come out from Avraham's body. Now, Yitzchak came from Avraham, but Yaakov didn't come from Avraham. Yaakov came from Yitzchak. So it's going to be, the order is going to be what we thought before, is what Rami bar Hama is saying. It goes children of Esav, father, brother, right? And then it'll go up to grandfather. But it won't go, right? And then how does it go to grandfather, by the way? It goes to the uncle, right? Maybe the father comes before the uncle, okay, before Yishmael. That's what we said in the previous. But he's not going to come before Yaakov, because Yaakov is not actually his Yosei Yerecho. And that's what Rami bar Hama thought. Now, it doesn't actually say whether Rami bar Hama was right over Rava, and he really disagrees with him, but it does say at least why he thought this way. Perhaps it's even, right, it's unclear, right, if this is a legitimate claim or it's just what Rami bar Hama thought when he asked the question. And in fact, they're going to further prove Rami bar Hama, because they're going to say Achinami Mistabra, that this reading was a legitimate reading. It was reasonable that Rami bar Hama at least thought this way, because the Katane, as it says in the Mishna, Zehaklal. Kol kodem benachala yotzei recho kodmim. Right? It says anyone who comes first, their children come first. Right? Anyone who comes from them come first. So now, ilu ite Yitzchak, if Yitzchak were there, Yitzchak kodem, and then let's just go through the order. If Yitzchak was still alive, it would go Yitzchak and then Yitzchak's sons. That would be Yaakov. Right? So hashanami delayed to Yitzchak. Now that Yitzchak's not alive, Yaakov kodem, Yaakov would still come first, and only after would it go to the father, to Avraham. Shema mina, and that's why Rami bar Hama thought that there was a question here. Again, it's still unclear whether we would actually hold like him or not. Yaakov would actually come first, against Rava, who thinks that it's pretty clear that Avraham would come first, because he understands Yosei Recho as anyone who comes from Avraham, which would include his grandchildren. This whole thing is also a question about how strong do we view the relationship between a grandson and a grandparent. Right? It's a very strong connection, according to Rava. According to Rabbi Hama, well, the brother's actually closer than the grandfather. So it's interesting, something to think about, especially for those out there who are grandparents, right? It's interesting to think about. You know, you might side more on the side of Rava, that you really are closer. New Mishna, and with this we'll finish. Benot Tzlafchad natlu shlosha chalakim benachala. They got 3 portions of nachala. How did they get 3? Okay, they're going to say like this. Chelek avihem shayam yotzei Mitzrayim. They divided. Okay, they mean equally between them all. They got 3 portions. What they get? Well, their father was released from Egypt, from slavery, and was 20 at the time, at least 20. We don't know how old he was. And then he died in the desert, and he died before his father, Chefel. So what happened? Well, we're going to see that there's a machloket about whether the people who came out of Egypt actually each got a portion, because people came out of Egypt, right, didn't make it into the land of Israel. But there's an opinion that says they did get apportioned nachala, and then their children get that portion. So since he was actually one of the people who got out of Egypt, he had his own independent portion besides the portion he's going to inherit from his father. So his own independent portion went to his daughters. So that was the first part. So this obviously only holds by the opinion, which we're going to talk about in the next daf, about that Yosei Mitzrayim got nachala. The chelek im achiv echav b'nechsei chefel, when his father died after he was already dead, so they're benot haben, right? They're the granddaughters. So Tzlafchad's brothers got part of the portion of their father's inheritance, and the daughters of Tzlafchad got another portion of Tzlafchad's, right? His portion that he should have inherited from his father. And Tzlafchad was also the firstborn. V'shaya b'chol notel pishnei chalakim, and because he was a b'chor, he also got 2 portions of chefer. So they got the 2 portions that were chefers that were supposed to go to their father, and they got their father's portion that he himself got because he was from the Yotzei Mitzrayim. He had his own independent portion. So that's kind of a manifestation of the previous Mishna about the Benot Habat inheriting with the brothers. Here we have an actual case, and with this will end. And right, we reviewed already the first part of the daf. The second part of the daf were just these 2 questions about Avraham and Yishmael, right? A grandfather and an uncle. Who gets first? And a grandfather versus a brother, who gets first? With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. Shabbat Shalom and Moadim L'Simcha.